My name is Callie Marsh. I'm 36 years old. And on a Tuesday morning in March, I received a call from a transplant coordinator at St. Augustine Medical Center asking if I was still registered as a bone marrow donor. I said yes. She said they had a patient who was a potential match and asked if I would be willing to come in for confirmatory testing. I said of course. I asked who the patient was. There was a pause on her end, the pause of someone navigating the protocol around patient privacy, while also understanding that what she was about to say was going to land differently than most things she said in her workday. She said the patient had listed me as a family member on their intake form and had asked that I be contacted directly. She gave me the patient's name, my father. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long time after she finished speaking. Long enough that she asked if I was still there. I said yes. I said I would come in. Then I set the phone down on my kitchen table and I thought about a hospital waiting room 8 years earlier, and the chair beside my bed that had been empty, and the surgery that had happened while my parents were on a plane to my sister's graduation. Before I tell you what I decided, drop your city and the time where you are right now. I want to know where this story finds you. Now let me take you back 8 years, to the diagnosis that changed everything, and the morning I understood exactly who my family was. I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer at 28 years old. Not the most dramatic of cancers, as cancers go. Thyroid cancer has a high survival rate when caught early and treated properly. My oncologist, a calm and precise woman named Dr. Anita Vasquez, told me this in our first meeting with the particular careful honesty of someone who wants to reassure without minimizing. She said the prognosis was good. She said we had caught it at a stage where surgery followed by radioactive iodine therapy was the standard treatment and was highly effective. She said the surgery would be a thyroidectomy, removal of the thyroid gland, full or partial depending on what they found when they got in. She said recovery was typically straightforward, but that I would need someone with me for the first 24 hours post-operation and ideally for the first few days at home, someone with me. I was 28 and living alone in an apartment in Charlotte, 4 hours from my hometown of Greenville where my parents still lived, where my sister Becca was finishing her final year of a graduate program at the State University. I had moved to Charlotte 3 years earlier for work, a position at a healthcare analytics firm that I had built carefully and was proud of. I had friends in Charlotte, good ones, people I trusted. But when Dr. Vasquez said someone with me, I thought of my parents. I called my mother that evening. Her name is Sandra. She has a particular way of answering the phone when she knows it's me, a brightness that arrives immediately, an eagerness that I had always found warming until I learned to read what lived underneath it. The brightness was genuine. I want to be clear about that. She loved me. She just loved me in a way that had always required me to be smaller than I was, quieter than I felt, less demanding of the attention that was more naturally directed elsewhere. I told her about the diagnosis. I was calm about it, which was not performance. I had had 2 days to process the information, and I had moved through the fear into the practical, which was where I tended to live when things were hard. I told her what Dr. Vasquez had told me, the prognosis, the plan, the surgery date, which was 6 weeks away. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Oh, Callie, that's such scary news, but you said the prognosis is good?" "Yes, Dr. Vasquez is confident about it." "And the surgery is straightforward?" "As far as these things go, yes." Another pause. "When did you say the date was?" I told her. "The second Friday in May." A longer pause this time. "Callie," she said, "that's the same weekend as Becca's graduation." I had not known this. I had scheduled the surgery based on Dr. Vasquez's availability and my own work calendar. I had not checked my sister's graduation date because the thought had not occurred to me, which tells you something about where I was in my family's hierarchy of consideration. "I know this is hard timing," I said, "but I'm going to need someone there." "The doctor said I need someone for the first 24 hours at least." "Of course," she said quickly. "Of course you do. Let me talk to your father." She talked to my father. He called me the next morning. My father's name is Robert. He is a man who has spent his life being reasonable in the particular way that prioritizes the appearance of fairness over its substance. He approaches difficult conversations the way a lawyer approaches a case he knows is weak, with careful language, strategic framing, and the goal of arriving at a conclusion that has already been decided before the conversation began. He called me, and he said he had been thinking. He said Becca's graduation was a milestone. He said she had worked incredibly hard for 6 years in her program, and this was the culmination of all of it. He said missing it would be a wound to her that would be difficult to repair. I said, "Dad, I have cancer." He said, "I know, sweetheart, and we are going to be there for you through all of it. But the surgery is one day. The recovery, the treatment, all the appointments after. We will be there for every bit of it. We just need to be at Becca's graduation first." I held the phone and listened to my father explain why my cancer surgery was less important than my sister's graduation. "Can't you reschedule?" he asked. I thought about that sentence for a long time afterward. Can't you reschedule? As if a surgery date was a dentist appointment. As if Dr. Vasquez's calendar and the operating room schedule and the 6 weeks of preparation I had already completed were things that could be moved around to accommodate a family's travel plans. "No," I said, "I can't reschedule." "Then maybe," he said carefully, "you could ask one of your friends there." I want to tell you what that sentence felt like, not the words themselves, but the thing underneath them. The casual assumption that my friends in Charlotte were an adequate substitute for my parents, that I could simply redistribute the need for family to people who were not family, and the math would work out the same. "Okay," I said. I said okay because I had heard what the conversation was. It was not a negotiation. It was a notification. "We'll come the following weekend," he said. "We'll be there for your recovery. We love you, Callie." I said I knew. I hung up and sat in my apartment and looked at the wall for a while. Then I called my friend Dominique, who had known me for 4 years and who answered with the particular warmth of someone who already knew something was wrong from the way I said her name. I told her everything. She said, "I'll be there, all of it. Whatever you need." She was. My sister called 2 days later. Becca is 3 years younger than me and has always occupied a different position in our family's emotional geography. Not cruelly, not with intention, just by the accumulated weight of years of attention directed her way. Her achievements celebrated more loudly, her needs met more readily, her presence in the room generating a warmth that mine had to work harder to produce. She was not a bad person. She was a person who had grown up being the center and had not yet had cause to examine what that cost the people orbiting her. She called and she said she was so sorry about my diagnosis and that she hoped the surgery went well and that she wished she could be there. But the graduation weekend was so important and she had family coming from 3 states and she really hoped I understood. I said I understood. She said, "Mom said you have a good friend who's going to be there." "Yes," I said. "Dominique." "That's so great," she said. "It's really good you have people there." I said yes. We talked for 10 more minutes about her graduation, about the dinner my parents were planning, about the dress she had found for the ceremony. I listened, and I said the appropriate things, and when we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand and understood something I had been circling for years without landing on. I was not a priority, not in a crisis moment, not when the calculus was actually run, not when a choice had to be made between my cancer surgery and my sister's graduation. When the test came, the answer had arrived in less than 24 hours, and it had been clear and unambiguous. I was the one they could count on to be okay. I was the one who had friends, who was capable, who would manage, who would understand. I was the one who could be asked to reschedule her cancer surgery. I filed that understanding away in the part of myself where I kept things I knew but was not yet ready to act on. And I got ready for surgery. The surgery was on a Friday morning at 7 a.m. Dominique drove me to the hospital at 5:30. It was still dark, the kind of dark that belongs only to very early morning, the city quiet and slightly unreal. She sat with me through the prep process, held my hand when they put the IV in, made the nurse laugh with something I don't remember anymore, and was there when I went under and there when I came out. I woke up in recovery to her face and a cup of ice chips and the particular disorientation of anesthesia wearing off in a bright room. The first thing I registered, before the pain and before the thirst, and before any coherent thought, was that she was there. The second thing I registered was that the chair on the other side of the bed was empty. I did not ask about my parents. I already knew. Dominique stayed for 2 days. She slept on my couch, picked up my prescriptions, made food I could swallow around the soreness in my throat, sat with me through the first nights when sleep was difficult, and the fear that had been managed during the practical preparation arrived quietly in the dark. My parents called on Saturday afternoon. They had arrived at the hotel near the graduation venue. My mother's voice had the slightly distracted quality of someone in the middle of an event, managing multiple things at once. She asked how I was feeling. I said I was okay. She said she was so glad it had gone well. She asked if Dominique was still there. I said yes. She said, "That's so wonderful. You have such good friends, Callie." I said yes. She said they would come the following weekend, as planned, that she couldn't wait to see me. I said, okay. My father got on the line briefly. He said he was proud of how I had handled everything. He said I had always been strong that way, as if strength was the explanation for why they weren't there, as if my capacity to manage without them was the reason it was acceptable to make me manage without them. I said thank you, and we hung up, and Dominique, who had heard my end of the conversation, looked at me from across the room with an expression that said everything she was choosing not to say. "They're coming next weekend," I said. "I know," she said. We didn't talk about it further. My parents came the following weekend as promised. They arrived on Saturday, stayed 2 nights, brought food and gifts, and the particular energy of people who are working to make a visit feel like they have covered something. My mother fussed over my recovery. My father fixed a shelf in my kitchen that had been loose for months. They were present and warm and doing everything right in the way that people do everything right when they know they did something wrong and are trying to close the account. I let them. Not because I had forgiven anything, because I was recovering from cancer surgery and I did not have the resources for a difficult conversation, and I had learned long before that weekend that difficult conversations with my parents required more energy than they ever returned. I was pleasant and grateful and appropriate for 2 days, and they left on Monday morning feeling, I think, that things were fine. They were not fine. They were filed. I did not talk about that weekend for a long time, not to my parents, not to Becca, not to anyone except Dominique, and eventually a therapist named Carol, who I started seeing 6 months after the surgery when the anger I had been managing finally needed somewhere to go. Carol was the first person who named it precisely. She said, "You've been the family's designated strong one your whole life. The surgery was the moment you needed to stop being strong and be cared for, and they chose not to be there for that moment because they knew you'd manage without them, which you did, which proved them right and made it easier for everyone to pretend it was fine." She paused. "Except you," she said. "It wasn't fine for you." "No," I said, "it wasn't." "Have you told them that?" "No." "Why not?" I thought about it. "Because telling them would require them to sit with what they did," I said, "and I don't think they can. And I don't think I have the energy to watch them try and fail." Carol nodded. "So you're carrying it?" "Yes." "How long are you prepared to carry it?" I didn't answer. I carried it for 8 more years. I need to pause here for a moment, because I want to tell you what the 8 years looked like. Not dramatically, not as a list of grievances, just accurately, because the 8 years are the story as much as the surgery was. I completed my treatment. The radioactive iodine therapy happened 6 weeks after surgery, another thing I navigated largely alone because the timing didn't align with anyone's schedule. I was in isolation for 5 days. Radioactive iodine requires it. In my apartment with instructions not to be near other people, eating from disposable dishes, watching television, and feeling the particular specific loneliness of being sick in a way that requires you to be away from everyone. Dominique left food outside my door every day. She knocked and stepped back, and we talked through the gap while I stood on the other side of the door. My parents called once during the 5 days. My mother sounded upset that she couldn't visit. I said it was okay. It was not okay. But I said it was, and I meant it in the way that people mean things they have decided to accept, because the alternative is a war they don't have the strength to fight. I went back to work. I had good scans. Dr. Vasquez said the word remission with the careful precision of someone who understood what it meant to the person across the desk. I sat in her office and felt something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. The feeling of a threat that had been real becoming past tense. I built my life in Charlotte carefully and deliberately. I was promoted twice at the analytics firm. I bought an apartment at 31, a 2-bedroom in a neighborhood I loved, with a second room that became a study and then a home office when the pandemic made that necessary. I traveled. I had relationships that mattered and some that didn't, and I learned, slowly, the difference between people who showed up and people who intended to. My family remained in the picture, not estranged, not cut off, present in the way of people you see at Christmas and call on birthdays, and discuss with the particular careful distance of a relationship that has been quietly reorganized around something neither party has named. My parents visited twice a year. I visited them for holidays. The surgery was never discussed. Becca's graduation was never discussed. The things that had happened and the things that hadn't happened lived in the family like furniture everyone had agreed not to look at directly. I got better at not looking. Until the transplant coordinator called. I need to stop here, because I want to tell you what I felt when she said my father's name. Not shock, not anger, not immediately. Something more complicated than both of those things. Something that recognized, in the particular involuntary way of recognition, that the story had arrived at the place where it was always going to arrive. My father needed something that I could give or not give. For the first time in our lives, the equation had reversed. Has anyone ever needed something from you that made you understand the full weight of what they had done? Tell me in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do that now. Because what I decided and how I made that decision is the part of this story that I have thought about every day since. I came in for the confirmatory testing on a Thursday. The transplant coordinator's name was Michelle. She was in her 40s, professional and kind, the manner of someone who had navigated emotionally complex situations enough times that she had developed a way of being present without intruding. She walked me through the process. The confirmatory test was more detailed than the initial registry test. It would take 10 days to get results. I asked about my father's condition. She told me what she could. He had been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia 8 months earlier. He had completed 2 rounds of chemotherapy. The disease had not responded adequately. A bone marrow transplant was now his best remaining option. Without a match, his prognosis was significantly worse. I sat with that information. I asked about the compatibility. She said the initial markers were promising. The confirmatory test would tell them more precisely how strong the match was. I thanked her and drove home and sat in my apartment for a long time. I thought about my father on a plane to my sister's graduation while I was in surgery. I thought about his voice saying I had always been strong that way. I thought about 8 years of Christmas dinners where nobody talked about what had happened and everyone pretended the furniture wasn't there. I thought about what it would mean to say yes. I thought about what it would mean to say no. I called Dominique that evening. She answered immediately, the way she always had, and I told her everything from the transplant coordinator's call to the confirmatory test to what Michelle had told me about my father's condition. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want to do? Not what should you do. Not what are you going to do. What do you want to do?" Which was the right question and the harder one. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Okay," she said. "Part of me wants to help him," I said. "Because he's my father, and I don't want him to die, and because whatever he did, whatever they did, I don't think I'm someone who can watch that happen and do nothing when I can do something." "I know," she said, "and part of me is sitting in this apartment thinking about the empty chair." She was quiet. "The chair beside my hospital bed," I said, "the one that was empty." "I know which chair," she said. We sat on the phone together for a while without speaking, which was one of the things about Dominique that I had valued for 14 years. She understood that sometimes the silence was where the thinking happened, and she never rushed it. "If I do this," I said finally, "I need to do it on my terms." Yes, she said. I need them to know what they did, not as a condition, not as a trade. But before anything moves forward, they need to know that I know what happened, and that I have been carrying it, and that the carrying stops now. Yes, she said again. Whether I donate or not, that part happens. Yes. I called Carol the next morning, my therapist, who had been seeing me for 7 years by then, and who knew the full shape of the story. She said, "This is one of the most complex situations I've heard in a long time." I know. There's no right answer, she said. There's only what you can live with. I know that too. What can you live with? I thought about it for a long time. I can live with helping him, I said. If I can be honest first, if the help comes from a place I choose, not a place I'm pressured into. And if they don't respond well to the honesty, then I'll know something I need to know, I said, and I'll make the decision from there. That's very clear, Carol said. It took 8 years, I said. My parents called me the day after the confirmatory test was submitted. Not my father, my mother. She said Michelle had told them I had come in. She said she was so grateful. She said my father was doing his best to stay strong, but it had been a very hard 8 months, and this was the first real hope they had had, and she couldn't tell me what it meant to her that I had come in. I listened to all of it. Then I said, Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad together, in person. A pause. Of course, Callie. We can come to Charlotte, or I'll come to Greenville, I said, next weekend. Yes, absolutely. I drove to Greenville on a Saturday morning. 4 hours, the same drive I had made dozens of times in my life. The roads as familiar as anything. I arrived at the house on Millbrook Road where I had grown up, parked in the driveway, and sat in my car for a few minutes. Then I went inside. My father was thinner than the last time I had seen him. Not dramatically, but noticeably, the particular thinning of someone whose body has been working hard against something for a long time. He looked tired in a way that went past the surface. He stood when I came in and hugged me with more weight than usual, the hug of a man who understood something about the value of the people in the room. We sat in the living room. My mother brought coffee. We made small talk for a few minutes, and then it ran out, the way small talk does when everyone in the room knows there is a larger conversation waiting. I set my cup down. I want to tell you something, I said, before anything else moves forward, before the test results come back, and before anyone makes any decisions. I need to say this, and I need you to hear it. My mother nodded. My father looked at me steadily. 8 years ago I had surgery, I said. You both know that. You know the date, and you know what the surgery was for, and you know that you were not there. Neither of them spoke. I want you to know what that was like, not to make you feel bad, not as a condition of anything that comes next, but because it has been inside me for 8 years, and I am done carrying it alone. I told them. Not angrily, not with the heat that had been there in the early years, and had slowly cooled into something more precise. I told them about the morning Dominique drove me to the hospital at 5:30, while they were asleep in a hotel near my sister's graduation venue. I told them about waking up from surgery and seeing the empty chair. I told them about my mother's call from the hotel, the distracted quality of her voice, the words, "You have such good friends." I told them about the isolation during the radioactive iodine treatment, and Dominique's food left outside the door every day, and the one call my parents had made in 5 days. I told them about 8 years of Christmas dinners with the furniture nobody looked at. I told them about carrying it. My mother was crying before I finished, not performed crying. The real kind, the kind that arrives when something you have managed not to fully face arrives all at once in a form you can't redirect. My father was not crying. He was looking at me with an expression I had not seen from him before, the expression of a man who is hearing something true that he has been avoiding and can no longer avoid. His jaw was set, but not against me. Against himself, I think. Against the version of himself that had made those decisions 8 years ago and told himself the story that made them acceptable. When I finished, the room was very quiet. My mother spoke first. I didn't know, she said. I knew. But I didn't let myself know fully. I kept telling myself you were fine, that you had Dominique, that we would make it up the following weekend. She wiped her face. I didn't let myself know what I was doing. I know, I said. That's not an excuse. No. My father cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. I made a decision 8 years ago, he said. I told myself it was reasonable. I told myself you were capable and you had support, and it was one surgery and we would be there afterward. He stopped. I have thought about that decision many times in 8 months of being sick, about what it means to need people, about what it feels like when the chair is empty. The room was very still. I know what it feels like now, he said. I should have known then. I looked at my father, 63 years old and thin from chemotherapy, and sitting in the living room of the house I had grown up in, saying the thing he had needed to say for 8 years. Thank you, I said, for saying that. He nodded. His eyes were wet. We sat together for a long time after that, not comfortably, exactly, but honestly, which was something we had not managed in a very long time. The confirmatory test results came back 11 days later. I was a strong match. Michelle said it in the careful professional language of someone delivering significant news, but the significance came through the language anyway. A strong match. My father's best option. Possibly his only viable option in the time frame they were working with. I asked for a week to make my final decision. She said, of course. I spent that week doing the things I always did when I needed to think clearly. I worked. I walked in the evenings. I called Dominique. I sat with Carol. I went to the farmer's market on Saturday morning and bought vegetables I didn't need, and walked home slowly through the neighborhood and thought about the full shape of the thing. The surgery had been 8 years ago. My father had sat in his living room and said, I know what it feels like now when the chair is empty. He had not said I'm sorry in those words, but he had said the thing underneath the words, the thing that meant the same thing, and he had said it without being asked and without performance. That mattered. My mother had said she had known, but not let herself know fully, which was not an excuse, but was a truth, and truth, however imperfect, was what I had asked for. I thought about what Carol had said. What can you live with? I could live with helping him. Not because I owed him, not because family obligates you to set aside what was done to you, but because I had looked at the full shape of the situation and the full shape of myself and understood that I was someone who, given the choice, would rather be the person who said yes than the person who said no. Not for him, for me. That distinction was everything. I called Michelle on Thursday morning. I said yes. The donation process took 3 months from the confirmatory test to the actual procedure. I will not tell you it was easy. It was not. Bone marrow donation involves a preparation process for the recipient and for the donor, and there were days that were uncomfortable and days that were long and days where the weight of what I was doing sat heavily. My parents were present for parts of it. Not intrusively. I had been clear about what I needed and what I didn't, and they respected the clarity in a way that told me the living room conversation had changed something. My mother called twice a week, not with the distracted quality of 8 years ago, but with a specific, attending quality. My father called once a week, short calls, asking how I was, and meaning it in a way I had not heard from him before. Dominique was there for the procedure itself. She had not been asked. She had simply arranged to be in the city that day and shown up at the hospital, which was what she had always done. I thought about the empty chair and the full one. The procedure went well. My father's body accepted the donation. The first indicators were cautiously positive, then more positive. Then, 6 weeks after the transplant, his doctor used the word responding. My father called me the day he heard. He said, Callie. I said, I know. He said, I don't know how to... And then he stopped because there was not a sentence that ended that correctly, and he knew it. You don't have to, I said. I want to. I know. Thank you, he said. Finally. Simply. The 2 words without anything built around them. I sat with them for a moment. You're welcome, Dad, I said. It has been 7 months since the transplant. My father continues to respond well. His doctor describes the trajectory as positive. He is not recovered. recovery from acute myeloid leukemia treated with a bone marrow transplant is a long process measured in years, not months. But he is moving in the right direction. We talk differently now. All of us. Not perfectly, not with the ease of people who have never had to work to be honest with each other, but differently. My mother and I had a conversation last month that lasted 2 hours and covered things we had never covered in 36 years. She talked about the patterns she had never examined, the way she had understood Becca's needs as more visible and therefore more real, the way she had trusted my capability in a way that had tipped into relying on it, the way she had told herself the story about the surgery that let her get on the plane. She said, "I have been asking myself for 8 months what I would have done if you had said no." I looked at her. "I don't know the answer," she said. "I think I would have understood, and I think that understanding would have been the thing I deserved." That was the most honest sentence she had ever said to me. "I didn't say no," I said. "I know." She looked at me. "Why not?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "Because I'm not someone who could watch him die and know I could have done something," I said. "That's who I am. But I needed you to know that the choice was mine, that it came from me, not from obligation, that I chose it." She nodded slowly. "The difference matters," I said. "Yes," she said. "It does." Becca and I have had 2 conversations that were real, which is 2 more than we had in the previous 8 years. She does not entirely understand what she was part of, the role her graduation played in a chain of decisions that led to a surgery alone, and 8 years of furniture nobody looked at. I have not asked her to understand it completely. I have asked her to believe that it happened and that it mattered, and she has said she does, and I have taken that at the weight it carries. It is not everything, but it is beginning. I want to tell you something about the chair, the empty one beside my hospital bed 8 years ago. I have thought about that chair more than almost any other image from my life, not with bitterness anymore, not with the hot, specific anger of someone who has just been wounded, just with the clarity of someone who understands what it meant and what it cost and what it taught her. It taught me who showed up, not in the easy moments, not at the Christmas dinners and the birthday calls and the family vacations where showing up was the obvious thing. In the hard moments, the 5:30 drives in the dark, the food left outside a door for 5 days, the sitting beside a hospital bed and staying as long as was needed and not counting the cost. Dominique showed up. My parents did not. And when 8 years later my father needed something only I could give, I showed up anyway. Not because of what I owed, because of who I am. Because showing up, I have learned, is not something you do in exchange for something. It is something you do because it is the kind of person you have decided to be. I decided that a long time ago. The chair beside my hospital bed was empty. The chair beside my father's hospital bed was not. That difference is not revenge. It is just the truth, standing in the open where everyone can finally see it. If someone in your life has ever let you face something alone, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what that moment was and what came after. And if this story found you when you needed it, share it with someone who is carrying something they have been carrying too long. You don't have to carry it alone. I'll see you next time.